Space Mobile Podcast.
We just basically turn their phone and be seamless, regardless of where you are. We don't want the user even to know that it's connected by satellite. Listen, the opportunity that we have is very, very, very large.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining. We're going to get started here shortly. I'm just going to put this on mute. What's weird is the desktop application, I believe, doesn't play background music, which is a nice feature of the mobile app. But it doesn't seem like the desktop app has has music, so that's bizarre. Anyway, I'll come back shortly here. I just got to do something, and then we'll start. All right, I'm back. I think I'm gonna name this podcast "Are You Bullish Enough?" because I'm having to come back, overnight and throughout the day. Some new news comes out, and then I kind of piece stuff together, and then I just feel compelled to have to go on a space and talk about it. So, but yeah, thanks everyone for joining. There's been a few nuggets that kind of came out overnight, and then I thought a bit more about, again, like the UBS conference where Scott spoke, and so I just wanted to talk about it. So, I labeled this space Golden Dome because I think that's probably something for people who are invested in AST Space Mobile. It's something that's top of mind. But for those people who are not familiar with the company, they have no clue what's going on. They just think about the company as providing broadband cellular connectivity to unmodified phones. And that's even if they have any idea like what AST Space Mobile is. Interestingly, this morning I was reading, Bloomberg put out this large piece on various growth sectors in aerospace and defense. And when I went through the area for space and defense, there's absolutely zero mention of AST Space Mobile. And so that kind of shows you what we're dealing with here. The market just has no clue what's about to hit them. And I think it's going to be an absolute load of bricks that gets dropped on people, and there's going to be a complete scramble to figure out how they missed this, and more importantly, like why should they invest in AST Space Mobile? And so, I just want to maybe I'll just start by saying, putting together some of the pieces, the mosaic. Space Mob. I guess it was like a few months ago. There were some filings with the FCC where the company started putting some meat around the fact that we are going to have some of the satellites in a polar orbit, and you typically would do that, meaning the satellites orbit from the North to South Pole. And the reason why you would do that is you want to have, and this is primarily for military applications, but also for Earth observation. Some companies utilize this orbit as well, but you want to be able to map and have coverage of every single square inch of the Earth. And when it comes to applications like sensing and detecting, for example, missile launches, which if the U.S. has to deal with those in the future, which I hope we never do, a lot of those missiles would probably be coming over the North Pole in order to hit, locations in the U.S. And so having radar and sensing capabilities to detect those launches requires that you have a polar orbit. And so we learned, I guess it was like a few months ago, that AST is going to have a shell that orbits, that has a polar orbit. I think if I remember correctly, it was something like north of 20 satellites are expected to have that orbit. So, you don't file to do that to address consumer applications. I mean, it's not like there's a ton of researchers out in the Arctic that need mobile connectivity. I mean, that's nice, but it's not a huge growth market. But so the fact that we are planning to have satellites there is a big giveaway that there's obviously military implications here. The other thing is that FM2 and FM1 were delayed because of some changes, customer requirements, which this is speculation from Space Mob, but pretty sure those were military requests and changes. And so, for example, FM2, which we're still waiting on, that that satellite has actually has a change in inclination of where it's going to be, and Kathy and I have talked about it a bit, and it seems like there's some pretty clear use cases as to why that inclination is changing, and it's important to note that when you launch on a you launch a satellite, you can't just go to the launch provider and say, "Hey, we're going to change the inclination." Especially if you were going to do that as a rideshare when other customers are seeking to have very specific orbits, you can't just say, "Hey, actually, can we go to a different inclination?" Typically, you would want or you would have to get a ride on another launch that actually fits that inclination, or you have to get a dedicated launch. And so yeah, that I think that kind of explains a bit as to why FM2 has been delayed, because some changes in customer requirements, not only potentially in some of the hardware that's on the satellite, but also the mission, what they're trying to test. Um, and so the other thing is that you've got this new disclosure, and so we know the company has been ramping up manufacturing space. Um, we've gone from the initial disclosure, I think over the summer, is that the company picked up office space in Homestead, Florida, and also in Spain, and so that got square footage up to like 400,000, which is huge. And then recently they expanded Midland to get to 500,000. And then Scott mentioned in this call that they're actually looking for more space. And they're looking to put up more manufacturing space to be dedicated solely to micron production, which I think is a huge sign, right? Like, as we know in a lot of these military programs, and especially for Golden Dome, it requires a lot of upfront capex, and you have to show the government that you have the capability to produce what they're requesting, and you have the capital to do it. And so I think that was a pretty big tell there. The fact that they're expanding what was already expanded production in Midland, they're doing even more. Um, and on top of that, I think what was it? I think it was like a week or two after they did the massive convert in October. Um, I was talking with the company about it, and there was this, I had asked, had this been in the plans? Like, what is the capital being used for? And they had said, there were no plans to raise that quantum of capital, sometime, I guess, in August, September. However, due to some opportunities that came up and became concrete, and of course, like the stock price, had performed quite well. They decided to go out and raise that money in order to go execute against those opportunities. And so I think that's another tell. Like, as Kook has mentioned in his space before, a lot of this government work, you actually need to come fully capitalized and show the government that you're making a commitment that you can do what you say you're going to do. And so this acceleration and expansion of production, well beyond what's needed for commercial, tells you something, that the company is confident that they are going to win some pretty big awards here. And it's not like some small award. Like they're we've gone from 500 employees to 1,800, and who knows where it is now. But they're the disclosure of getting to 6 satellites per month, but eventually having the capacity to get that to 12 satellites a month. Like, I think the original idea was to do 6 satellites to stand up the Block 2 constellation, and, maybe you might increase that a little more to get a head start on the mid-band constellation, but to double production, that tells me that they're expecting, big government work to come down the pike. Um, and so to close that, you've got, Scott at the end of the discussion saying, they're gonna have a couple shells up, they call shells constellations, but you're gonna have a couple shells up, but then beyond that, potentially a government shell. And that's about as like concrete as it gets. Like, he's telling the market and telling us that they fully expect to win government work. And it's not as if you go well beyond 500,000 square feet and 12 satellites per month to do something small. I mean, we're talking big scale here. And so the other thing that I didn't really talk about yesterday, which actually, and again, this is why I'm back on this mic talking about it. The other thing that I didn't cover is the fact that we're doing this all, and the reason why it makes sense, and Scott talked about this, like, putting up the most power, the largest arrays at the cheapest cost, known in the history of civilization. And that last part is really critical, right? Like, cost is huge. If you look at traditional primes, if they were to do something comparable in terms of capability, power and communications and processing, you're probably looking at a program where each satellite's going to run you 300 million to $1 billion, and I think that's inclusive of launch. And launch is a pretty big piece, at least for AST Space Mobile, of the per cost of satellites. However, you have AST who can go to the government and say, "Look, we're putting these satellites up for $21 to $23 million a piece." I mean, that's the cost. That's not allocating, of course, like R&D and all these other things, but that's the incremental cost of materials, putting it together, and then the launch costs. That's really compelling. Like, that versus 300 million to $1 billion. And then when thinking about Golden Dome, timing is everything as well. Like, there's a lot of these contractors that are putting forward solutions, and they're trying to win work, and they're like, well, we're give us some money and we're going to build this capability for you. We'll deliver it in 1, 2, 3 years. I mean, we know how that primes are pretty slow on this stuff. Whereas AST Space Mobile, like, the satellite is ready. It can serve a multi-role mission, and it's ready. Like, we're launching these things, and it's clear FM1 and FM2 were built to spec for the Halo demonstration, which Halo had asked for 2 prototypes to be launched and deployed. I think it was like before the end of 2026, but the company was like, "Shit, let's just do it now," which was smart because then, um, of course, like, Trump won the presidency, and then there's Golden Dome became a thing, and so by putting those 2 satellites up, that's going to be a huge, or that I think probably was a key factor as to why, or will be a key factor as to why I think the government's going to give the company a big award. Um, but yeah, so those, going back to price, it's something that I think is lost on market and folks, where it's, 21 to $23 million to send up 100 kilowatt power generating satellite that can do, direct to device communications, but then also sensing, radar, some level of compute, which, we talked about before. If you wanted to shift to this data center idea, you would swap out the processors and you would reconfigure their satellite. But I think it's important that, the whole idea of data centers in space, like, that's still some time away. But everybody is now, it's a rush to get there, right? But the near term objective is for military to have some level of intelligence in the space layer, because, we talked about how you want resiliency, but also some of the ground assets that you're communicating with, or perhaps if you're relying on ground data centers to do the compute, those data centers may not be around in an environment where you have a conflict, and, perhaps, like, maybe some of that conflict comes to the U.S., which would be bad. But so that's why you need compute actually up in space, and so that's why, this stuff is relevant. But um, what really kind of brought everything home. So I think the company is well positioned for Golden Dome. I tweeted about this, about how the $23 million price point, I think, is kind of like a checkmate metric for the Department of War, because they can put up a lot of these satellites for relatively inexpensive cost. It's not like you're going to a prime and they're going to charge you a few $100 million a piece. Like this is $23 million, and it solves two huge problems around missile defense. One is like getting power into orbit, and the other one is actually creating a highly capable, you know, sensor, right? That can do radar sensing, PNT, all these things. I mean, the satellite can, in its current form, without modification, can do a lot of the functions that you're trying to complete that will be part of Golden Dome. Um, and so one tweet that Elon Musk had put out overnight, which kind of brought me home, is that he specifically discussed how Starlink V3, which is their much larger satellite, I believe, their current satellite has a phased array of like 2.5 to 2.5 meters. This one is going to be somewhere along the lines of like 5 meters, 5 meters by 5 meters. So it's going to be a much bigger phased array. But that satellite, which is their next generation, they're hoping it's much bigger. They're hoping to get that satellite up sometime over 2026, but it's all predicated on Starship, because the way that satellite stows and unfolds, like it doesn't fit into a standard fairing, which, go back to some of our IP, the novel, what we call the waffle, the way that you can shove so much solar panels and antennas into a very compact form factor, like that's really important. And so, Musk yesterday disclosed that each of the V3 satellites will be capable of generating 20 kilowatts of power. And he said, he thinks it'll launch at scale around Q4 next year, which, if you extrapolate that, that's probably more like 2027, because as we know, space is hard. But he talks specifically about how it's not going to be a problem to scale that to 100 kilowatts if the satellite mass is shifted towards solar arrays and radiators for AI compute instead of the giant phased array antennas for internet connectivity. And that phased array specifically is for mobile devices. And so, there were some tweets from him just talking about how it's not going to be that difficult to shift and reconfigure that satellite for AI compute versus communications. And so I think, you got to discount that to some degree, but Elon is a smart guy, and he's experienced, and SpaceX has a ton of smart engineers. I think that just kind of highlights that the problem of solving communications, especially for mobile communications, is pretty difficult and shouldn't be discounted relative to being able to pivot some of that technology to then focus on AI compute. But the most important thing about that tweet is the fact that SpaceX, these V3 satellites, they're not going to be ready. And they're not going to be ready for a long time. They're not going to be ready till 2027, perhaps even later. And you're looking at a design change in order to get over 100 kilowatts of power. And so I guess the one thing I don't know is how Starshield kind of plays into all this. I'm not sure exactly what the capabilities are of Starshield, but the key thing here is that, AST has these satellites, and they're being, we're on the cusp of launching our first one, and they're going to be rolling, I think we're pretty close to getting, by the end of this month, my guess is we'll have 6 Block 2 satellites completed after FM1, and we'll start rolling these things out like hotcakes. But for Golden Dome, the key requirement is that Trump wants that system up and running before the end of his term. And so, we're talking 2028. That's not much time. And so when you're the US government and you're looking at who to give awards to, hey, look, there's this company in Midland, Texas that is building a 6 to 7 ton satellite that can generate 100 kilowatts of power. It has a ton of compute on it that could be swappable. You could put GPUs or TPUs in there. But it's got sensing. It can do radar, PNT. It can do all these things. Like, to me, that sounds like it's going to be, as I mentioned in the tweet, a core, like the backbone of sensing and power infrastructure for Golden Dome. And so that's what I meant by, yesterday having this moment of absolute clarity. It's like, oh, it's all here. Like it's coming. All the pieces line up. It all makes sense. And so I think someone had mentioned that the the House had passed funding and for Golden Dome. I think that was like yesterday, maybe the day before. And so my guess is like we'll start hearing, we heard some initial pieces of I guess smaller work maybe it was a week ago. But we're gonna start hearing rumblings. And I don't know if there's like gonna be a formal announcement from White House about this. I'm sure there will because they're always focused on getting as much PR possible out of these things. But will the company announce anything? I'm not sure. Maybe. But who knows like if it's I know the primes have been pretty vocal about their work, and so I'm not sure like when and if the company will announce this stuff. But what I do know is like just given how many folks are part of Golden Dome on the government side and contractors, like this stuff will eventually get out to the market. And so Cook talks about this whole concept of the invisible hand and how things, we always joke about whether things are priced in or not. Um, I don't think the market, you know, I don't think the Golden Dome is priced in at all for AST Space Mobile. Like for someone outside looking in, like it's all speculation. And look at these like retail investors. Who knows? They're crazy and they're just here to pump the stock. And what do they know? But as I mentioned before, like the amount of due diligence that the Space Mob does and the ability to put together the mosaic is unparalleled. And I do think, um, and I guess to place to our advantage, right? I don't think the market expects this. You've still got skeptics in the company, just even for the core business, but no one's valuing Golden Dome. But I think there's a huge opportunity here. Like imagine, if we find out just, hypothetically, like if we find out the company gets a few $100 million or $1 billion contract for Golden Dome to provide, sensing and power for the constellation, um, like where does stock go? And how do people value that opportunity? Like people view the company more as a, you know, direct to device, providing service to consumers, but they don't really think about it as a defense opportunity. And so when that's opened up, like how do people value the stock? How does it re-rate? Does it, I mean, might I if the company got like $1 billion award from Golden Dome in the next few weeks, like the stock could double. Like it's an opportunity that the market's not pricing in. And part of what fits that narrative is the fact that Scott, um, what I think was it at B of A, he talked about someone that the research analyst talked about it, the how revenues were going to unfold for the company, and he specifically mentioned, near term it's going to be all government. Like this year we're talking tens of millions. 2026 will be hundreds of millions of government, and then following that, that's when consumer, like the M&O, the business that we have with AT&T, Verizon, Saudi Telecom, Vodafone, that's when that business is going to ramp up and scale. It's going to be 2027. And so what gives you confidence of a few hundred million in government revenue in 2026? Like, isn't that obvious? Like, it's got to be Golden Dome, right? Like some of these other programs are going to be big and potentially big, but the one that gives you immediate scale in terms of revenue and impact is going to be Golden Dome. And so, yeah, um, I don't know. I, I think the timing was people, because the government shut down, it got pushed back. But I think we'll probably hear something more formal in January. But there's like 2 weeks left in December. I think things are going to start leaking, is my guess, and we'll hear some information about who's winning these things and people's level of involvement. And I think AST is going to be right there in the middle. Um, and so yeah, I joke, but we're not bullish enough. Like if you put all the pieces together, uh, I'm highly confident it's going to happen and it's going to be big. It's not going to be small. Um, yeah, and yes, there is this aspect of we've talked about leveraging dual use, like, the government will, yeah, certainly they're going to want to use the Block 2 constellation for dual use in terms of communications and PNT, but I think this is important enough and big enough where the government is going to ask for a separate shell. And it's going to be part of what is going to power the infrastructure layer for Golden Dome. And that, I could be wrong. That's my speculation, but one thing that I've been good at in my career has been kind of piecing stuff together. And I I initially did this primarily for corporate actions and M&A. But then as I moved over to, once I left the industry and was investing on my own, um, being able to piece stuff together and thinking about themes too, like that's always been one of my strengths. And so, yeah, it seems pretty obvious and abundantly obvious, like this is kind of where things are going. The other thing that I talked about yesterday, which I think is, I mean, we're seeing it now, it's happening like pretty quickly, is 2026, I think, is going to be the year for space investing. And so for people who are well versed in these names and understand what companies have the proper capabilities and I mean it's going to be huge. And all these, I think all the skeptics who have been floating around the industry and kind of poo-pooed everything. I think the amount of capex and spending around defense, around communications, around what is now like compute in space, like AI data centers, which I think in the near term, we're not replacing terrestrial data centers, but it's going to be something along the lines of, the infrastructure that's out in space is going to need AI compute. And so you're going to start seeing some of those applications emerge. But then as people kind of learn and of course test and refine their thinking around it, eventually, years from now, then you will have the potential where AI data centers in space or data centers in general will start taking over some of the load from terrestrial data centers. As I talked about yesterday, like if you extrapolate the need for power, land, cooling, which is water, resources in general, it's just not going to be sustainable. Like whether you need data centers for AI, crypto, whatever it is, whatever application, you just can't keep building these things because there's consequences, right? And you've got to weigh and balance those consequences against the needs of humans, and so it's pretty finite down here. And so I think moving data centers in space is eventuality. It's going to happen. There's a lot of problems to solve, and you've seen debates kind of blowing up on Twitter and people poo-pooing it. And but yeah, that's usually how transformative technologies get introduced to the market. People laugh it off, they scoff at it, and then as they dig in, it goes back to the whole adage of the AST Space Mobile. We have this saying where for new people to AST Space Mobile, if you look at the company and spend about 5 minutes of due diligence, you'll probably want to short the company. But then if you spend an hour of due diligence and really dig in and with an open mind, you'll actually want to mortgage your house and go, which funny enough, like is probably a true story for some of you guys. Um, but anyway, yeah, it's an exciting time. I don't think I've ever been this bullish before. And that's saying, I mean, this is going to be way bigger than the Verizon DA, right? Verizon coming on board and changing the game for the company where it's like, oh yeah, we got AT&T and T and Verizon. I mean, that obviously was huge. And we wouldn't be here today without Verizon coming on board because that pretty much validated everything the company did back in at the end of May of 2024. But this award, Golden Dome, is going to open up a completely new like growth vector and way that investors see the company. And you've got TMT investors already maybe kicking around, and then there's gonna be like new sector investors who are focused on space because it's gonna be a thing now, like for 2026. And then you're to suck in all the defense guys, the defense specialists who probably haven't been looking at AST Space Mobile, and once you get a Golden Dome award, they're gonna be like, oh, that's really interesting. Like I need to go research that company and figure out if there's an opportunity to invest. And so, yeah, it's an exciting time. And I think Q1 is setting up to be huge, right? Like we've got a rocket launching, which is a big event catalyst coming up, which got pushed off to the 20th, I think, due to some of the space conditions. But that's out of Israel. Shortly thereafter, which will probably be early January, you're going to have BB7, and my guess is we're going to get some PR in the next few weeks of the first batch of 3 Block 2 satellites that will be sent to the Cape Canaveral. I think that's going to happen relatively soon, and then probably not long after that, the second batch of 3. And so, yeah, against that backdrop, you've got we talked about this before, but you got Powell who, cut rates, and I think yesterday's meeting was quite dovish. And one interesting facet, which people kind of forget, is like inflation was a lot of it was caused by Trump's tariffs. And so, when thinking about the macroeconomic backdrop, like if inflation does get hot, um, Trump kind of has this funny lever now that he can pull. He can just remove tariffs on certain items, and then inflation comes down. Funny, weird how that works, but yeah, the environment is solid. I mean, we've got all these catalysts coming up for the company, and we got this big one, which many of you guys already know, Golden Dome. Of course, it's not gonna happen until, or it's not done until it's done. But I am supremely confident it's coming, and I think, as I said before, the market, that is definitely not priced in. The market doesn't understand that. They don't know why AST Space Mobile has any applicability, but it's coming, and people, whether they like it or not, it's going to be shoved down their throats because, oh, this company is going to be a key component to power and provide communications and sensing for Golden Dome. Like, I need to go learn about it. And maybe these people on Twitter with these red A's, like maybe they aren't half as crazy as I thought they were, um, which is funny to think about. So anyway, yeah, that's what I had to say mostly. Let me just check and see if there's comments. I know folks have mentioned in the past that because I'm doing this now on the desktop app, you can't actually leave comments directly in the space, but you can leave comments on the tweet that I put out for the space. So let me see here. Omni Aeronautica, SpaceX V3 sats need an ASIC as well as Starship. V3 sats likely not available no earlier than 28. That's true. Elon has talked about the need for ASICs for performance for V3, but similarly to AST, they probably could just, put FPGAs in first just to get those satellites up and running and do testing. And so, I think to get to the highest levels of performance, they will need that ASIC. And I remember researching it a bit, and there's some people who are closer to Starlink who have said that they probably have been working on the ASIC for some time. So it's probably sooner than we think. But typically, an ASIC is a 3 to 5 year process. They probably will have an ASIC ready sometime in 2027. And then, but if they go through growing pains like we did, it took a long time to spin up our ASIC, and maybe that gets delayed by another month. But fortunately for us, our ASIC is ready, and it's being integrated into satellites in the first quarter of 2026. And so that's another big one. Someone said AFT, and we know Trump loves things that are the biggest. Yes, that's true. So Bluebirds, just from the ability to boast about having the biggest, Bluebird satellites, the Block 1s, are the largest communications array in low Earth orbit, and then those are going to be dwarfed by Block 2 satellites, which are 3 times bigger. So the ability to say that we have the biggest and most beautiful satellites, I guess that's another marginal benefit of giving us a big award. Let's see. Someone's asked, okay, I don't see any other questions. All right. Or maybe here's some more. Yeah, let's see, there's some, oh, someone saying, isn't this the most risky stock to short at the moment? Yes, I think so. Because we're on for 2026, we have all these things these catalysts coming. And then this Golden Dome award, I don't think is, aside from some crazy Space Mob members, I don't think anyone's really talking about it. If you look at the sell side research, there's basically like no mention. I mean, there is the discussion of potential military use cases, but I don't think there's been anything about Golden Dome. The other thing is, uh, I think like Bank of America, if you looked at like their 2026 and 2027 projections, like they have nothing for military revenues. And so, yeah, as people kind of refine their financial models, they will have to, uh, revise forecasts higher. Like if you get a Golden Dome award, that's huge. And you add that on top of the $1 billion of contracted, committed commercial revenue from M&Os, what does that get you? Right. And so those numbers are going to have to go up. And, research analysts like Scotia, who downgraded the stock based off of, valuation, but not really thinking about what they were doing, they're going to have to reevaluate, their their research and question their choices in life, right? Especially, when we get that award. Let's see. Can you mention discussions around solar power arrays and where you see this going for potential CapEx revenue capture? Uh, I don't know. It's early. I mean, the so one thing I was thinking about is the fact that, we are going to have these factories building microns, and these are building, as Abel has said over many years, these are building blocks. You can do all kinds of stuff with these components. Those microns, that design has not changed since the beginning. So the initial microns for Blue Walker 3 were, I think it's 30 centimeters by 30 centimeter panels, and then for Block 2, they put two of those together. And then for Block 3, I believe each fold is like 16 of them. And so, part of the change for Block 3, sorry, not Block 3, Block 2, is that, the unfolded mechanism is gonna be a lot simpler. There's gonna be less folds to get to a fully deployed array, or unfolds, and so there's in terms of reducing complexity, like, that's really important. But then, when contemplating some of these future applications, you could see a world where, maybe if the company's not going to directly, um, provide satellites for certain applications, it might actually sell microns without the antenna side, but it might sell the microns to or be part of, like, as a group, a satellite project to provide the power. And so there's a lot of opportunities. I mean, I think as we mentioned before, there's the ability to leverage the patent portfolio, which is 3,800 patents, and you can go provide licenses to other manufacturers who want to utilize the technology. But that doesn't seem to be the focus right now. The company is putting up production capacity because they want to go attack all these opportunities. And so, um, for a startup like AST, I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's still a startup, even though it's big. But going through production hell and trying to get production up to a level where they can attack all these markets. We talk about how, like, it's an insurmountable wall of opportunity. It's like, you stand up production and you go try to pursue all these things, and then there's more applications and customers coming to you um, asking to work with you, and which I fully believe. Like, I think for the AI data center opportunity, the company, again, there's not any companies out there that are putting 6 to 7 ton satellites up in space, and that also includes, SpaceX, right? And so having the ability to do something of that scale and size, and having 100 to 120 kilowatts of onboard power, um, that architecture can be used for any number of applications. And yeah, is that gonna be a competitive advantage in 2 to 3 years? Not sure. The patents will be there, but then I'm sure we'll start seeing other people putting. If I was a defense prime, I'd try to build a similar type of architecture, because it's clear power is gonna be the biggest problem in space. Power and, of course, the associated, um, you know, technologies to dissipate the heat. But, yeah, we're well positioned, and, think going back to what I started with, I don't think we're bullish enough. And so, yes, we can have 20, 30, 40, I mean, 50% drawdowns, as the macro backdrop changes, and who knows what the next few weeks will hold, or next quarter or 2 quarters. But rest assured, like, I think the company's opportunities ahead of it are very attractive, and they're coming, and I'm very confident in that. So, anyway, I'll wrap up the space there. As I said before, I'll probably have to do another space tomorrow or the day after, and Kook, this perhaps, like, alleviates some of the pressure for Kook to cover everything. But yeah, man, we're we're in a very special place and a special time, and this company is uniquely positioned, and it's delivering, its constellation, and it has the technology, at the right time, and I think that's key. Like, there is some aspect of luck to this, where Golden Dome became something, that was a focus for the country, and the company has the right technology at the right time, and is on the cusp of, you know, ramping production, and so unique candidate to get, a significant part of the Golden Dome, awards. So I'll end it with there, and, we'll talk again perhaps tonight or tomorrow or the day after. So thanks everyone for joining, and, we'll talk again.
Thanks for listening to the AST Space Mover podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To catch all the latest news about AST Space Mover, make sure to subscribe. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.
We're doing something very, very big. And I think with this technology, we can really affect billion lives. AST Space Mobile is the only company that has proven technology to deliver cellular broadband connectivity directly from space to your everyday smartphone. People will just basically turn their phone and be seamless, regardless of where you are. We don't want the user even to know that it's connected by satellite. Our role is to bring this into reality, always in partnership with the MNOs.
Listen. Waffle.